There are in mindfulness many states of mind that can be helpful to our practice, and few of those is as important and underlooked as equanimity. Hi, my name is Ted Meissner. Welcome to Mindfulness Voyage, and today we're going to be exploring the topic of equanimity. And before we get started, if you wouldn't mind, tap that subscribe button. It helps other people to find this podcast as well. All right, let's get started. Our guest today is Margaret Cullen. Margaret, welcome back to the podcast. Good to see you again.
Nice to see you too, Ted, and thanks for inviting me back.
I am so looking forward to this conversation because what we're going to be talking about is one of my favorite topics from the traditional settings. But before we go into that, I'm wondering if for those of you who have not heard from Margaret before, maybe you haven't seen our previous episode, it was a decade ago. Margaret, could you say just a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. I've recently written my second book, which is on equanimity, but and I'm a licensed psychotherapist, and for over 20 years, well, actually 30 years, I've been really working at the edge of translating contemplative programs into mainstream settings, both through teaching, writing curricula, training teachers. I was I think one of the first 10 people certified to teach MBSR, and I pioneered that at Kaiser in California and taught for about 15 years and worked on a lot of research studies. And then I helped Thubten Jinpa develop the compassion cultivation training, which was a similar endeavor to make compassion training accessible to mainstream settings. And then most recently, I've been exploring how to do the same thing with equanimity.
Thank you for that overview. And well, let's dive right into this. For those who may not have a background in the traditions, equanimity is a part of what are called the divine abodes within traditional settings. I'm wondering if you could just put a little context around how equanimity shows up and what that full set of four might be.
Thank you. Yes, equanimity shows up on a lot of lists in Buddhism. I think the four divine abodes is the most important one. So I'm glad we're starting there. And although equanimity is very highly articulated in Buddhist philosophy, I discovered from my book that it's prized across all the Abrahamic religions as well as philosophical traditions like Stoicism and most indigenous wisdom traditions as well. Um, but in terms of the four immeasurables, the Brahma Viharas, the divine abodes, whatever we want to call them, I love talking about equanimity in this context because they're all expressions of love, a particular type of love that I think it's important to clarify from the outset. The first of the four immeasurables is loving kindness or metta, and it's different from how we often use the word love colloquially. This is a love that isn't warm and fuzzy for the ego. And that's the kind of love we're often seeking. Um, and loving kindness won't satisfy that itch. It won't scratch that itch. It's an unconditional friendliness that is supportive of all of life. And I think of it as really the connective tissue that is holding everything together, a kind of love that we can lean into, but it's the kind of love that doesn't love you because you're special, or you wrote a book, or you have a podcast, or on and on. So that's loving kindness. And then the second, when loving kindness meets suffering, it becomes compassion, um, karuna. It becomes a motivation to relieve suffering. It's a very natural response of the heart. It's found in all kind of biological systems that have a social element, which is many, many, many animals besides us demonstrate compassion. It's really necessary when we live in a social system to care about the suffering of other people. That's what helps us all survive. We couldn't survive without it. The third one, sympathetic joy. It's interesting. I don't know if anybody's studied this in terms of other animals, other social animals, but when this kind of love, this unconditional friendliness, meets the success, the well-being, the flourishing of others, it becomes sympathetic joy. It's really an expression of generosity in many ways. It's a generous side of love that can celebrate the well-being of others and not feel threatened by it or jealous of it. And finally, the last one, equanimity. I did an interview with Sharon Salzberg last week, and she said, when I first encountered the four immeasurables, equanimity didn't feel like it fit with the others because they're kind of warm and juicy and loving, and equanimity seems kind of cool and, you know, more distant. And I couldn't figure out how it connected to the first three. And of course, she does now very well. But I would say that when this kind of love, this unconditional friendliness and goodwill meets vulnerability, when it meets certain aspects of reality, it becomes equanimity. So rather than detach, rather than collapse, rather than defend ourselves when we encounter the limits of our control, when we really come face to face with the poignancy of what it means to be a human being, when we stay open-hearted in the face of that, that's equanimity.
That's very interesting that you bring this up, that there's a sense of fullness with equanimity rather than an absence, which is often how people may approach it. And I noticed that recently you had posted something that speaks very much to our mindfulness practice, even if we haven't encountered these ideas of compassion and altruistic joy and equanimity and loving kindness before, is that with equanimity, it's not a matter of distance. It is a matter of perspective, but not of distancing. And I often encounter that with new teachers when I'm supervising or new students, that they think that mindfulness is giving them some distance from experience rather than proximity to it and inclusiveness with it. I'm wondering if you could say just a little bit more about that, because you had just posted about it recently.
Yes. Well, I think it's key. And I'm glad you brought it up, Ted, because it's really one of the central misconceptions about equanimity. And as you said, it comes up in mindfulness too. There's a bit of a paradox there that can be hard to engage with for people because it feels there's a bit of a maybe a false binary that in order to have perspective, I have to detach from the experience. And I definitely challenge that. And I opened the book. Well, the first chapter's epigraph is a quote from Matthew Brensilver, a meditation teacher, that I really love, that I think captures this so beautifully. He writes, equanimity deepens the poignancy of life while draining it of melodrama. So we actually feel more deeply, but are less caught. And another a metaphor or analogy that's used in both Zen and Theravadan Buddhism for equanimity is grandmothers, seeing through grandmother's eyes, loving through grandmother's heart. So, at least in the archetype of the grandmother, she is not forsaking love. She's bringing perspective into that love and having less melodrama. But it's not a distant or cool or less caring. Grandmothers are very caring. And I think that works really well for helping people to kind of get a flavor for what we're talking about with equanimity.
I'm curious from your work with equanimity and over the years in teaching mindfulness and even as a therapist. As you've encountered this as well, the definition within therapy for equanimity is almost exactly the same as we've been discussing here, is that balance within a context of difficulties still happening around us and maybe within us. What are some of the other misperceptions or different perspectives that people may bring in that are maybe not as helpful? And what are some alternative ways of approaching equanimity you might suggest?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that question too. So it's very natural, I think, for people to approach a concept like this with a kind of false ideal of what it should look like. And one of the most pernicious of these is calm, that equanimity means you're calm. And you can be calm and equanimous, but you can have every other flavor of feeling in the universe and find equanimity also. So equanimity is not interchangeable with calm. And doing all the publicity for my book and doing a lot of interviews, I'm always taking the word calm out everywhere. Everybody's putting calm back in and I'm taking calm out. Um, that there is an idea that equanimity means calm and tranquility. And I think it's better understood in two ways as kind of either having more space around the same feeling or activation or experience. That's one way to find equanimity. Another way is quicker recovery time. And this is a really important dimension of equanimity that kind of this group at Harvard, a lot of them Dave Vago, Gail Debord, you know them, you've written about them. They wrote one of the earlier papers on equanimity, a kind of more theoretical paper, and they talked a lot about affective chronometry and how this is might be a more accurate measure of equanimity. Do we get caught? So we have activation, we all get hijacked. We have feelings. The idea is not to not have them by any means. It's kind of how quickly do you recover from these? Do they flow through you? Is there viscosity in the system? Shinzen Young has been writing a lot about equanimity. It's really a big focus for him. And his kind of main way of thinking about equanimity is the lack of friction in the system. So this stuff is happening, but there's no friction. It's just flowing. So that might mean quicker recovery time. I mean, there are a lot of ways we could think about that. Shinzen is very mathematical and he has all these physics equations, for it. Um, And it's fun. That was part of the fun of writing the book. I interviewed more than 30 people, many Buddhist teachers, lots of other teachers. And it was fun hearing where different people got a foothold on understanding, describing, and defining equanimity.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you bring up tranquility as well, and that these are different contexts and different ideas, even within traditional settings. They have entirely different words. Upeka versus passaddhi, those are different things. And not just like we may have in English, lots of different words to describe something that is almost exactly the same. No, these are very unique and distinct ideas and ways of being. And again, what you're describing here is that this is not about being calm. Calm may be present, it may not. This is about how we are in perspective while being influenced, but not being tossed about by what is felt and what our circumstances are.
Yes.
So, Margaret, I want to ask for those who are kind of curious about this idea of equanimity and maybe starting to tease out the differences between equanimity and calm. What are some things you might suggest to those of us who may be having a hard time with this? It may be a bit of a challenging thing for us to wrap our heads around. What are some ways that we might help land this idea of equanimity, that way of being present with difficulties as they are?
Well, you know, I think most of your listeners have some kind of mindfulness practice or are exposed to mindfulness. And, you know, the good news is that for all of you, you're already practicing equanimity. And, you know, unless you've been taught equanimity in the most narrow sense of the word, um, as just a kind of way of paying attention, which is not typically how most mindfulness, and certainly not how John Kabat-Zinn envisioned it. Um, Equanimity is a part of what you're doing. And not only have you trained in it already, it is natural to you. Every step you take, you get off balance, you regain balance. We are part of nature. The natural world has equanimity built in. We have it built in. So the first thing is we don't have to go outside of ourselves to find it. That's really important. And not to set the bar too high, to kind of look for equanimity in the moments when we're most activated, agitated, outraged. You know, there are many, many, many doorways into equanimity. Part two of my book is that's what part two is. And they include meditation, they include thought experiments, they include the refuges. Taking refuge is a profound doorway into equanimity. They include awe and humor. There are a lot of ways to kind of break the trance of reactivity and regain balance. There are many, many ways that are very accessible. Um, so it's, like a lot of things, it's closer than we think it is. And, you know, I won't get into this here, but I do share in Quiet Strength a story about having to give a talk on equanimity and lead a practice to the Mind and Life Institute at a time when I was deeply, deeply brokenhearted and really having to dig in deep to see if I could do it. And I guess I hadn't written the book at that point. No, I hadn't written the book yet. I'd been teaching workshops on equanimity. I hadn't written the book yet. And I wasn't sure. I really wasn't sure if I could be a quantumist with a broken heart. And so I checked in and I discovered that I could. And kind of, yes, of course you can be. You can be brokenhearted and you can be a quantumist and you can lead a practice on equanimity. But I had to find out because it didn't seem possible until I did it. And then I discovered, yes, okay. And so that's kind of the experiment of our lives that we do all the time is check out, as our mutual friend and mentor John Kabat-Zinn would say, go into the laboratory of your life and see for yourself, see what's possible. What does equanimity look like and feel like in this moment?
And we can just get a taste of it. It doesn't have to be an earth shaking, once and only complete transformation. It can be in little bits like exercise. We get a little bit of an idea and maybe a little bit of an experience and a little bit of confidence with, ooh, I can do this. And you can. You're not stuck. Margaret, I'm wondering if there's anything else that you'd like to share with the viewers before I let you get on with the rest of your day.
Um, Thank you for that, Ted. That's so important, what you just said. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate the conversation. I think the only other thing I might add in these times of tremendous upheaval that we find ourselves in, equanimity can feel too soft. And I gave a book talk last week here where I live. And I live in the Bay Area where, you know, we tend to be somewhat politically homogeneous and outrage can become a kind of virtue signaling. And we can almost feel shame if we're not outraged, and no hyperbole feels strong enough to express adequately the mess we're in. And I would like to suggest that here, in where the rubber meets the road, our personal activism, our engagement, our moral distress, um, our lives as citizens in this moment that feel, certainly for me, I feel like I'm being asked to stand up in different ways than I ever have been before. Um, Equanimity can be a form of resistance, very powerful. Look at Rosa Parks. Look at the monks who walked from Texas to Washington. Equanimity can be a refusal to become that which we abhor. So I think in closing, I just want to encourage people not to feel like equanimity is a cop-out in the context of our very challenging political times.
Yeah, thank you for that. It is a way to meaningfully engage while supporting yourself and others in these experiences. For those who are watching or listening, however you're consuming this, I do have a number of links for you where links are found, including a link to this book that we've been talking about and our previous interview, as well as a link to Margaret's site. Our guest today, Margaret Cullen. Margaret, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Ted. I've enjoyed speaking with you.
Thank you so much for being here today. I hope you enjoyed this session. I always do enjoy the conversations with the experts we have as our guests. And remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. And I'll see you again soon on Mindfulness Voyage.